Hello, I'm Sherman Lewis, and I'm here to talk about the rise and fall of the State Route 238 bypass in Hayward. We're going to start off with a bunch of graphics, and then I'll go back and track through some of the history to try to explain shortly in a limited amount of time, 50 years of this very interesting history. So let's get started with our first slide. We see here a picture of the quarry where they're going to build a freeway. And that freeway, of course, we stopped, and this has been sitting there for decades before and decades after the decision. I came across this quarry years and years ago when I was doing a study, and it's still up in the air, and I'm going to try to come back to this at the end to say a little bit about it because it's sort of the last big issue of this whole story. Next. Here we have the famous stub of the freeway in San Francisco, which is symbolic of the huge city-destroying freeway campaigns that go back to the 1920s, when the wealthy of New York City built the Long Island Expressway to reach their mansions out on Long Island. It took off from there. People loved these freeways, and there was tons of money for freeways, and then boom, the money ran out. And when it ran out, that freeway was stuck up there for decades, the Guff Street off-ramp. It's symbolic of what we're talking about, which is freeways and their success, and then also the limitations. Next. The Foothill Freeway was going to go down to Fremont, and they needed interchange in Hayward with another huge freeway that was going to go over to Dublin Canyon. And then back to the west across the San Mateo Bridge, they built this incredible huge, or designed this incredible huge interchange on the side of the hill. And what was interesting to me is they left off any access to Cal State Hayward. This would have been a gargantuan project. It was stopped fairly early on because they canceled the whole route, the 92 freeway, way before they stopped the 238 bypass. Next. The campus realized that they'd been cut off and needed to have a way for people to get from the freeway up to the campus. So they had to build a harder road as quick as they could. On the right-hand side of the picture, you can see the oval loop of the roads of the cemetery and how the road used to be with houses just north of the cemetery. On the left, you see what they did. They wiped out all those houses, they put on a big road, and that big road is now what goes up to the campus in order to make sure the campus would have some access and not be cut off by this freeway. Clearly, the state highway people were not coordinating with the state higher education people. Next. They needed to plan a freeway, and the dotted line they finally wound up with was the dotted line that's here. But in the process of getting there, they avoided land off to the right of the word right-of-way and Guerin Regional Park, because off on the right there was the Dry Creek Ranch of the Myers sister, and I want to come back to that. What's interesting in a way about this alignment is that they actually had some alignments that were on the west side of Mission Boulevard. A little hard to imagine now, but that shows the land that they acquired on either side of the dotted line. Next. This guy is Bob Swanson. He's still around, and like the rest of it, a lot older, but he was one of the key fighters for the Caltrans tenants. He was the voice. He had tremendous problems of being ignored because that's what they did. He went to Sacramento, and Senator Holmdahl just gave him the short shrift, and he came home kind of angry about it all, but he stuck with it for years and years, finally had a chance to buy his house from Caltrans, decided it was in such bad shape he didn't want it, bought another house. And he worked for Nate Miley for many years, one of many characters involved in this whole story. Next. We started the Citizens for Alternative Transportation Systems with Audrey Lepel and me and a bunch of other people. We were going to promote, well, basically alternative transportation systems. This was our symbol, Citizens for Alternative Transportation Systems, CATS. And CATS and my organization, Hayward Area Planning Association, we struggled from the early 70s until we finally defeated the project around 2000. So it was a long, long haul to make this happen. We would meet every month at Audrey's and try to figure out what to do next. They wrote an environmental impact statement, and as part of that, they had to do some drawings about what the freeway would look like when it was built. On the left, you see the Hard Center, a nice building with the little theater there, and the road in front, a parking lot where you see the freeway. People didn't quite realize visually how huge that freeway is going to be, and here you see it on pylons towering over the theater. And on the right, it heads over towards A Street and crosses A Street with the same kind of structure. This is one of the images we were able to use to persuade people that maybe this was not such a good idea. Next. There were many, many projects that were demanding money along with the bypass. One of the reasons the bypass failed was because they couldn't get the money because there were other higher priorities. Now, I just want to use this slide to mention them. This is a long forgotten project. We kind of gotten used to it, take it for granted. This is an absolutely huge undertaking that Ed De Silva's great team of engineers executed basically on time and on budget. So we're going to give the guys who build these things some credit for a pretty good project here. But there's also 580 out to Pleasanton, and that got widened. 580 going north through Oakland. That got improved. 238 over to 880, and that got widened. 880 itself went through at least 3 increases in its side. There's a major loop overhead turn from 580 to get southbound down to the bridge. So there's been dozens of projects that were very successful and got built, but they preempted money, and that was part of the story for stopping the bypass. One little thing that's kind of interesting here is you see in the middle bottom part where it says Route 238, that's the old route on Foothill Boulevard. They wanted to move that up for the bypass to roughly where the S is on the north-south compass marking. But if they built this freeway interchange, they couldn't build connections to the bypass because that would be another stub end of the interchange. The rest of the bypass wouldn't be there. So they built temporary connections. So when we come up Foothill Boulevard, we're driving on these temporary connections, which now, of course, have become permanent because the bypass was never built. So that's a little bit of history about why we have that kind of access to this big interchange today. Next. This is an incredibly important graphic. It's hard to overemphasize how important this is. In the middle top left, 6-lane expressway freeway, middle top right, 6-lane highway. The part on the left, the expressway freeway, is shown as a dashed line along Mission and Foothill as being the bypass project. But you know from the map I showed you that the bypass was aligned much to the east, approximately where the wording is for 6-lane expressway freeway. This voter pamphlet is lying to the voters. When I first saw this, I was amazed. I thought, oh, that must be a clerical error. Next slide. Now here's the description that has the alignment along Mission and Foothill. Very clear, crystal clear. This had nothing to do with the bypass alignment that Caltrans and the city wanted. This was strictly something the voters were voting on along Mission and Foothill. Next slide. This is another example of a before-after diagram that relates to where Cal State University Hayward almost was built. This is a Saul's property on the border with Union City on the south side of Hayward. You can see on the left that back in 1968, it was vacant farmland. And there was a political controversy. The decision finally put the campus where it is today at the top of Carlos B. Boulevard. And of course, meanwhile, that farmland became industrialized as part of the Hayward Industrial Park area. And it's the very big area on Crocker, Zephyr area on the west side of the BART tracks and the BART service track area. Next. Katz had many supporters. One of the most important was Glenn Kirby. We had meetings at his house as well as at Audrey's. We decided we needed to raise some money, so we held this rinky-dink yard sale kind of thing. And here you have people attending the event to raise a few nickels and dimes for our efforts. And he had this famous bulldozer pole. Next. And there is the bulldozer pole. He put this big stake up to show how high the Foothill Freeway is going to come through his neighborhood there on D Street. Next. As things went along with the environmental impact report, an issue came up on the open space south of Harder Road above the cemetery, where they had not done their due diligence on endangered species. So one of the things that delayed the environmental impact statement was the necessity of trying to find out if there are any Alameda whip snakes. The whip snakes have been very, very valuable as an endangered species that we have used as much as we can to try to stop bad projects. Next. As the freeway was defeated, the agencies and the city decided they needed to amend the plan. They realized they couldn't build the bypass where they wanted it. And you see that short green worm in the middle of the box. That's the alignment. They decided to amend the project in order to be able to build this new corridor improvements. What fascinated me about this is that this project is completely consistent with Measure B. They did not need to amend. They could have gone ahead with the Measure B and not amended the expenditure plan. But their minds were so fixated on the bypass alignment off on the east, they could not understand that they were actually doing what the voters had approved. So they went ahead and they amended the plan to show what the previous plan already had. Next. One of the things that got destroyed was this mural on the Mexican restaurant on D Street, when they widened D Street. It's one of the many costs that we paid for highways, this fanciful depiction of life with Don Guillermo Castro, because his hacienda and killing yard were right, slaughtering yard for his cattle were right across the street from this wonderful mural. And it's a kind of a loss of Hayward's history. Not only this mural, but the library, the high school, the Carnegie Library, the railroad stations. We keep losing our history. And this was part of what we lost. The D Street widening was part of servicing the whole 238, 92, all these improvements that the city wanted, but really not so much improvement for quality of life. Next. There's Audrey LaPelle right in the middle, and one of our big supporters, Barbara Fields. I'm on the right. After our victory, we got hard to approve a bench that we're sitting on next to the Hayward Plunge bandshell. Next. Caltrans then had a huge amount of surplus property, and we have the Caltrans executive, Bob Bechtold, on the lower left. You'd put your money in, you'd walk in on a specific property. He would look at your prepayment of a certain amount of money and approve you as a bidder. And people would stand around the outside of a living room of a Caltrans house on D Street. And we would bid. I bid on one of these houses. I bid $400,000 for a house, and I got outbid. And I was smart enough not to increase my bid. The people who bought that house on Palisade, as far as I know, are still living there. Caltrans is very efficient in disposing of a couple of hundred properties through this auction and bid process. Next. This is an example of an auction pamphlet that was mailed out. I have a few hundred of these in my files, and shows what people could see as to what they might want to buy. And there's that house on the lower right that was sold through one of these auctions. Next. As all this land was sold, the city became upset that developers would come in and push the city to approve projects that were legal, but not what the city really wanted. So Fran David very shrewdly bought all of these properties from Caltrans.
Who's Fran David?
Fran David at that time was the city manager of Hayward, and they all went ahead. There were 10 properties. The number 10 doesn't show up. It's actually a small property next to the number 1 on the right. That's where the Sohay development got built, right close to the BART station down there. So that one's pretty far along. Number 6 is the quarry that I showed you earlier that's still remaining. Other projects are proceeding at 8 and 9 and so on to redevelop all this land. Next. Here is the Sohay project, but again, it shows the chronic problem of how we think about transportation. This does not have any walking route to the BART station. It is not organized for walking to the BART station. It does not control the number of cars or provide for having parking paid for separately from the housing. This is strictly a suburban project at a somewhat denser level rather than a real coherent urbanistic project that would reduce our dependency on automobiles. Very frustrating to deal with this Lions project because of the continuing car orientation of our society. Next. Here we're back to our quarry, which was number 6, and where we are still trying to figure out what to do. At the bottom on the left is where Carlos B comes through. You can't see it very well from the road. You can see on the where the yellow line is, which shows a potential trail, by the way. That's what that yellow line is about. And if you drive up to the end of Palisade or Overlook, you can park and walk around the dead end barriers and get a look at this very, very large area. Next. And so we come back to City Hall, which is the beginning of the problem. And now we're at the end of the problem, trying to figure out what to do with a little bit that's left of this now dead freeway. So now I'd like to transition to having me talk through some of the high points of this history. So the slides go off and I go on. Let's start at the beginning a little bit. Yeah, there I am. With the idea of freeways in general and being very successful within our car culture. And part of that was the approval of a freeway that would go from 580 in Castro Valley all the way down to Fremont. Very expensive, 6 lanes, competing as it turned out. At that time, MTC had some new laws that forced it to make some choices. And they had a very good staff member named Norm Steinman, and his job was to figure out what the commission should approve and what it should deny. He denied the Foothill Freeway. He said, look, we can build 880 to handle the traffic. We don't need that Foothill Freeway over there. And so they said, we're going to get rid of it. Well, Hayward went ballistic. They said, no, at least save the part in Hayward. We need our little bypass. And so MTC said, okay, sure. We'll let you have your bypass, but you've got to find the money for it. So that was a deal for many decades, but over time, MTC changed its mind. So now we go forward to, or at least sideways, to an early event when the hearing about where to put the freeway was discussed in the Veterans Building on Mission Boulevard. And they had a whole bunch of routes that went up towards the hills from Mission, actually on the south side through the flatlands, trying to figure out where to put it. And a critical player here was the Myers sisters, who own what is now Dry Creek Park. So they go to this hearing and they talk to the Highway Commission with Mayor Perchio of Hayward, and Edith Meyer is telling people of her testimony. They were 3 sisters who were never married. They were very educated, very outspoken. Edith was the medical doctor, Mildred was the architect, and Jeanette managed this Dry Creek Ranch, which is their summer place. Henry Myers, their father, was a very prominent architect, built a lot of stuff around the Bay Area with a home in Alameda. And they participated locally for decades in the life of this area. So here's Edith Myers talking to the highway commissioners. We are 3 sisters with no immediate heirs, 3 women who wrote this plan into our wills 5 years ago and who have refused fabulous sums of money so as to keep our land intact for the use someday by all of the people. And they said that if they built a freeway through condemnation, they would take away the bequest. They would allow the land to be all developed. Well, the Highway Commission knew this was a beautiful piece of land. They approved the parks and they said, okay, Myers, we won't put the freeway there. Very interesting, because at that time, people thought, well, there's room for this freeway and there's room for the park. And so the commission put the park over in the Dakota area of Union City, a classic environmental racism response through the homes of this moderate to low income Hispanic community. Now, the alignment further north went through the moderate to low income neighborhood around 4th Street on the side of 2nd Street, which was a Portuguese, largely Portuguese immigrant community. Again, a similar issue. So they really felt you could do both without being sensitive to some of the problems, but they created litigants. They created people who wanted to go to court to stop this thing, and they went to court and they stopped it. And a key figure in all of that was Jim Grace, who was a very active Chicano advocate.
What city?
In Hayward. He lived on D Street with his wife, died unfortunately of a heart attack. But before he went, he was very effective in finding lawyers and getting money, because at that time we had the war on poverty and the legal aid societies with some money, and we had a whole bunch of new laws. CEQA, a new highway law. We had something called 4F, which meant you couldn't build a highway through open space, which in this case was the trail coming up from the plunge up Ward Creek. And so 4F said, well, if you're going to build across Ward Creek like that, you got to look at alternatives. And they hadn't done it. The new law said, look, if you're going to dislocate people, you got to find replacement housing. You got to find relocation assistance. And they hadn't done that. So Judge Peckham put forth an injunction in 1972, which closed the whole thing down. Then along comes Jerry Brown. Jerry Brown made a public statement against the Foothill Freeway. He appointed Jan Turco, his highway person, and she didn't do anything for 8 years. So that stopped it for a long time. Well, these guys are desperate now to get this thing built. And they've gotten rid of Route 92. It has some extra land. So Holmdahl goes to the Senate and he has a special bill passed, a new unique bill, the Local Agency Transportation Improvement Program. And they're going to take some of this surplus land from 92 and from that big, huge intersection, put that money into the bypass because they just didn't have the money. Now we get to 1986 and everybody wants more money because the effectiveness of the gas tax has declined and they're looking for the sales tax. The special laws passed in 1985. They set up this commission run by the Board of Supervisor head. It involved our local mayor Giuliani. It had a citizens commission committee. It had a technical committee of the highway planners and all these different finance committee all working together to put something to the voters of all of Alameda County. Everybody brought in their favorite project. It was a kind of a, not a pork barrel, but a road barrel combination of all this stuff that people wanted, but Hayward was a problem. And so that's why they already knew it was really controversial, and that's why they put the alignment along Mission Foothill. So that goes to the voters, and I see it there. I see it as a clerical error. Now some time goes by, and Caltrans, it passes. Caltrans has some money, and they do the EIS, and they have to have a hearing. And this is in the old Centennial Hall with that big, wonderful meeting room and convention center that's now been knocked down. They do a lot of testimony, presentations, and so on. A lot of people are there talking. They want it. Some people, they don't want it. Other people, I'm there, I don't want it. Other people want it, and so on. So after this meeting, we're sort of milling around. And I talked to the president of the Alameda County Board of Supervisors, a guy named Knox. I say, you know, Bob Knox, how do you happen to make that clerical error? He said, oh, no, it wasn't a clerical. We did that on purpose because we knew it was controversial. And we were afraid if we put the bypass alignment in there, that people would vote down the whole thing. And he worked this out in a conversation with Giuliani. Now, Giuliani knew it was wrong. Knox knew it wasn't what they wanted. What Knox didn't realize is that Giuliani had no intention of building a project along Mission Foothill. Well, when I heard Knox say that they wanted this not to be the actual bypass, it was intentional, and they weren't actually doing what the voters wanted, I said, you know, this is really wrong. I remember that moment because it's so dramatic in my thinking. It's just an emotional moment. They can't do that, I said. And I went to our lawyer, Stuart Flashman. He was a critical guy who made all this happen because of his legal skills and his willingness to work for a small amount of pay. So he got involved, did a great job on all the legal stuff. We go to court, we lose at the local level. And that's called being local by the local power structure. So we appeal. And eventually that appeal is incredibly successful. It takes forever because what the court says, the three judges, a liberal, a middle of the road, and a conservative, the whole spectrum said, no, you cannot take money voters approved for one project and spend it on a different project. The problem all along had been that the agencies in the city were simply the black ink on the white page. They pretended it wasn't there. But that began a process where the agency finally gave up. We go through trial, we go back, they appeal, and they finally give up. So now we have to have a new freeway. We get into a whole new story of what do you do with a dead freeway? And we have a number of very important themes here. For decades, the Caltrans tenants have been suffering from absent landlords, poor maintenance, inability to get things fixed, poor work being done when they do get some money. This became such an epic amount of mismanagement that it got reported several times in the newspapers. And Bill Lockyer at one point got some money to do some fix-ups that didn't go real well. The good thing was a lot of people got pretty cheap rents for quite a few decades, including some people. I mean, Glenn was in some of this housing, and Audrey lived in for a while in Caltrans housing. Debbie Frederick finally got her house on Bunker Hill, and other people on Highland finally got their house. And it was great for them. There was a small number of long-term tenants who had some money to buy their house. And through a lot of pressure and lobbying, we were able to get that incorporated into a solution that was negotiated. And I got to mention Steve Ronfeld, another lawyer. He was incredibly skillful and dedicated, spent years and years helping people deal to get the relocation assistance, to get the replacement housing, to allow the tenants to buy houses if they had the money, to set up some special funds to help them out. He negotiated with Fran David. They finally came to a solution that wrapped it all up. Now, you may remember we had the Peckham injunction. That then went to the next judge along the way, and he kept it going. And you had to go back to him because the injunction was still there. They couldn't go ahead without lifting the injunction. But if you lift the injunction, there was nothing there to protect people. So part of the deal for the tenants was that they would sue the city, go to court. The court would approve the settlement in state court, and you had this binding settlement that continued so that when the federal injunction went away, you had the state settlement of the tenants' issues. Very clever solution of using the law to solve this problem with a friendly lawsuit. And that became the basis for a lot of the work with the tenants. So that was one problem. What do you do with the land? You got, what, about 300 acres here. So the city, and actually Caltrans came in with some money to help the city. Sarah Bowser was a city person who was leading all of this planning stuff. And so Caltrans needed to have some kind of a master plan and zoning, because otherwise they couldn't appraise the property. And if they couldn't appraise the property, they couldn't sell it. So we got this huge whole freeway, big plan. All the things were decided, the EIS or EIR, all approved. And now we have all the zoning, all the master plan designations that we need to go forward, including that quarry. The quarry came in with this environmental person who didn't know anything about me or my ideas for that quarry and said, well, we could put a school there or we could develop it or whatever. I said, no, I want that land for a walking, sustainable project. And I went to the city and said, can't we do something to at least preserve the opportunity for a sustainable, walkable community on that quarry? And the city shocked me. They agreed with me. Wow, that just doesn't happen.
Shocked them too.
Probably shocked them. So they came up with a new idea, which is the sustainable mixed use, which is basically what I was looking for. They limited the amount of parking, they allowed enough density, and that became approved for that area. So that was another issue. Now, once we had all that in place with the environmental approvals and the zoning and all that stuff, then Caltrans could sell all the properties, and they did a fantastic job. And then we get to the part where Fran David and Caltrans work out the sale of these 10 properties that I mentioned earlier. Well, how'd that work? The city didn't have the money to buy them. There's millions and millions of dollars. And actually the city became the owner. If you go to the city's GS website, they show up, City of Hayward is the owner, but they never paid for it because it was an option sale. And the city would then use their ownership to sell to a developer. The developer would pay the city will then pay Caltrans. It's worked with the Sohay development in South Hayward, and it's working through all these other properties as we go along. So that then dealt with the sale of the properties. Now we've got all this money. What do we do with the money from the sale? Remember, we have this unique state law called the Local Agency Transportation Improvement Program. So it always went by its initials, the LATIP. Now the LATIP, even though it's a local program, has to be approved by the California Transportation Commission. The commission is a fairly small agency, but it's very powerful. It controls all the money for all the transportation projects in Hayward. Caltrans, cities, anybody who wants to do anything involving any kind of state or federal money, they have to go through the CTC. Well, the LATIP had problems. It got amended 4 times along the way. But the thing is that all this money was going into the LATIP. So what are you going to spend the money on? Well, the LATIP provided that the sale of surplus right-of-way would be used for projects in central Alameda County. Well, who's central Alameda County? You have a bunch of entities and one gorilla. You have San Leandro, San Lorenzo, Castro Valley.
Union City?
No, Hayward. Yeah, those are the San Leandro, San Lorenzo, Cherryland, Castro Valley, Hayward. Well, Hayward's the 600-pound gorilla. So it basically has the most influence and power over those funds. And they wanted to do something to deal with their downtown congestion problem. But it's a perceived problem because the state of California set up agencies called congestion management agencies. And these agencies had to stipulate a certain route of freeways and highways as being the route that they would manage for congestion. So local streets are out, collector streets are out, but all the bigger highways are in this plan. And they had to measure the congestion because you couldn't reduce congestion if you didn't measure how much there was. So they would have cars drive along segments from A to B. How long did it take? What was the distance? What was the speed? They'd look at the design speed for that segment, and it would then be slow or fast relative to the design speed. So arterials at the C category were slow, at the B category faster, at the A category faster, and the freeways, of course, were very fast. So on a class C arterial, if the speed was slow, that was okay because it was designed to be slow. So you then rate these level A, B, C, and so on. The whole Foothill Mission corridor of the bypass was part of the congestion management plan highway system. It never had any congestion. It was always B, C, a little bit of D, not even E's or F's. So what is congestion? Well, in this case, the leaders of Hayward perceived congestion, and they had a theory that too many people were driving through Hayward, so we needed the bypass to alleviate congestion in downtown Hayward. All perceived, by the way, because as far as the technical definition is concerned, it wasn't really there. As part of this long history in negotiating the injunction, I managed to get some money for a traffic study. And I learned a lot, but I was kind of naive. And eventually, what I figured out, there's some mistakes, but what I figured out that there's a lot of traffic up on the bypass because they removed all the traffic from Mission Foothill. It really made no sense. If you kept the existing traffic on Mission Foothill, there'd be so little traffic on the bypass, it wouldn't be justified. If you were to charge a toll to go up on the bypass, people wouldn't pay it because most of the time Mission Foothill would give you plenty good access. And this gets back to all the research that I did about how all this works. Now, the city is planning now this project for using the money, and they build this loop. We still have this loop today. And the loop was approved by the traffic engineers, so it got approved by the city council. The basis for approving the loop was that it could improve how traffic crossed at the intersections, because you put this loop in and it affects the conflicting movements, which mean you can get more traffic through the intersections with acceptable level of service. But they never dealt with the question, how long does it take you to get from A to B? So you can come down Foothill, turn right on A Street, go down on Mission, you come out on Foothill. So you're going at a good speed, but it takes longer. Intersections work better, but it takes longer because you're going the long way around. They never asked the question, how long does it take? And then you have this problem of how do you get where you want to go any place? If you come up Foothill to reach Foothill, fine. But if you're coming from the north side, you're out of luck. We want to go up to Lucky's up Mission. You can't go up Mission, it's coming at you. You have to go Fletcher Watkins up to get where you want to go. And all these twists and turns make it hard to get where you want to go in downtown Hayward. So you don't try to go to Lucky and then to CVS, you go to CVS and then Lucky. If you have a two-way system and use the European level of transportation engineering, you would sort of liberate downtown from this fairly large excessive flow of putting Hayward in this loop. So we did what we could to stop the loop. They wanted to widen Foothill all the way down. It was too expensive and we complained and they stopped it. All the way up, widen Foothill. We combine, I'll take out all the buildings on the east side and we stopped that. They wanted to build a big underpass, overpass at Mission, Foothill, and Jackson. That turned out to be too expensive and we stopped that. And so what they had enough money for was the loop. Now, I think we should have some questions.
Thank you, Sherman. Let's take a look here. If anybody in the participant group has any sort of questions, you're welcome to go ahead and put those in either the chat field or the Q&A. I know that there's quite a few out of you, so please feel free to put your questions in the chat field. No, Sherman, I just have a bit of a quick question. As myself, my family lives on Grove Way, just right up there, which I believe a lot of those empty lots were also Caltrans properties that were falling also with Ruby Place being over by the Japanese tea gardens.
Ruby Street and Ruby Meadow.
Yeah, so can you, I don't want to take up anybody else's time, but while people are asking their own questions, can you talk a little bit about what's going on over there? We do get a lot of questions about that.
Yeah.
So maybe you could talk a little bit
There are
about
two
what's going on over
issues
there.
with Ruby Meadow: appraisal fraud and cutting down historic trees in a riparian corridor needed for a park for low to moderate income people. Heritage trees for subsidized parking. Well, that's wrong.
Yeah.
The appraisal fraud took place when Eden Housing told Valbridge property advisors that they wanted to build about 75 units. And Valbridge appraised it for about 45 units, saving Eden Housing about $2 million in their purchase price. Now, I can't guarantee that it was fraud. It just looks like fraud to me. I took the matter to the Bureau of Real Estate Appraisers, and they are totally dysfunctional. They've accepted my complaint and done nothing for a year and a half. It just sits there because they have too much backed up. It's to say that they have a functional board of real estate appraisals to look at these problems is misleading. They don't have the staff to make it work. I went to Caltrans and I finally found the right guy to talk to, a very nice guy who said, I'll look into it. And he came back with a really bogus answer that I haven't had time to look into. I sent a very good letter to the Chronicle. They refused to publish it. I'm not done yet with this. I've looked at the project. You can design a project to have all the units you want with 3 or 4 stories and have a lot of the parking you want. And you don't need to cut those trees down. This is due to the arrogance of Eden Housing on this issue. I've been a long time supporter of Eden Housing. We have a wonderful friend, Sarah Connor. There's a project named after her because of her very skillful advocacy and dedication to this housing. I'm a great fan of affordable housing. I supported the Strobridge Court project at the Castro Valley BART station. I supported the historical preservation of the Strobridge House. I have a very strong record supporting affordable. I'm promoting 700 plus units of affordable housing on Quarry. I will not accept being criticized. I want to stop subsidized parking from destroying this heritage woodland.
Wonderful. And so are we at a holding point on that as well? I mean, from what I understand, they do want to build.
There seems to be some hang up in the financing, but Eden Housing does not exactly let me know what's going on
For some reason.
for some reason.
No,
I have so many things that are on my plate that it's been hard for me to get to it, but it's on my list. I'll get there.
I'm sure you will. I'm sure.
And Anne, where did her last name go?
Out the door.
Anne, Dr. Anne, she's been terrifically helpful, very dedicated on this. And also Bruce King on Creeks, incredible expertise, incredible patience, excellent reports. He gets ignored just like me and Ann. So we don't know really what's going to work. The only thing we know, I think, is the trees haven't been cut down yet, although if they get cut down, I'll probably be the last to know.
Right. Well, thank you. We do have a question from David Schobrun out there. It says, how did you reach out to the community to get support for your advocacy and litigation? It seems like HAPA's extraordinary effort must have been had a broad base of support.
David Schoenbrunn is an old friend of mine. I did not pay him to ask that question. He has done a fantastic job with another related organization at the Bay Area level to try to deal with this absurd transportation policy that we have. Well, it's a good question because in a way, I don't know. We had these mailing lists, email was around. We'd hold these events. Audrey was good at organizing events. We had a wonderful event at the old Centennial Hall. We would try to get people to meetings, but I felt that really I was kind of incompetent. I could collect lists and I could send stuff out, but I didn't quite know how to grab people by the lapel and say, hey, let's do something about this. I mean, how do you, basically, what's interesting about your question is that people were not motivated by economic issues relating to transportation pricing reform. Well, who gets excited about transportation pricing reform? It's all the people who want to pay more for gasoline, very close to zero. So I have wonderful economic arguments that absolutely can persuade me we're killing ourselves with bad economics. People see me as just, oh, I'm against freeways. No, that's not right. I understand the economics. But I felt like I've always been kind of incompetent at the social networking part of it. And other people have been better at that. I do all this intellectual stuff. But people were motivated. They didn't like that destruction of open space. They didn't want their houses destroyed. And a lot of them were willing to speak up, pay some dues. But ultimately, to pay for that lawsuit with Stuart Flashman, Alice and I mortgaged our house and gave him the money.
Okay.
We didn't know if we were going to win. I didn't care, but we did win. We got all of our money
Thank goodness for that, right?
back. It's just
Well,
money.
well, we have Maria Maggione wants to know if did Eden Housing purchase any other of the former Caltrans properties?
Don't think so. They're all too small or unavailable. And they had a way of working with Alameda County, just slipped right in there because of the political weakness of this relatively unorganized neighborhood in the Ruby Street Groveway area.
Mhm.
They have one organizer, Ann, and she did everything she could. She got a lot of support, but the county did a horrible job of managing this whole thing from the get-go. And part of that is evident in the appraisal that certain laws designed to protect biological assets, that overlay of the policy requirement was not really followed. A lot of legal issues I didn't have time to look for, but it kind of smelled bad. We have new law that requires the county to approve a proposal that meets their requirements. They said their hands are tied. I think that was baloney. I think they're looking to get away from all these people who are attacking them with some kind of excuse. And the Castro Valley Municipal Advisory Committee, which had at least one good member, Dolly Adams, a friend of mine. The other people on it were very snobbish about these people down there that they didn't see as being legitimately part of Castro Valley, and they went the wrong way on the Eden housing issue.
And Sherman, just to clarify, are you speaking about Ann Maris? Is that
Yes, Ann Maris.
Ann Maris. Okay, wonderful. I'm just I thought that's what you meant, but I wanted to just clarify for you.
You'd be amazed at how much I've forgotten.
No, you've been through a lot of yourself. So Maria also wanted to know if the quarry area by Carlos be accessible for hiking/viewing.
Oh, anybody can walk there anytime they feel like by trespassing on city land. And nobody cares.
That's a wonderful way to spend a Saturday, I think.
And if you do happen to walk in that area, in this vast granite floor, be sure to walk up north to where the trees are, and about in the middle of the area, get up to the edge, and you will be able to look down into this, way down into this crevice creek, Doble Creek. And you'll see that it's a really neat habitat area. We want to build a little bridge across it to have that trail going up to Highland Boulevard, up to Ward Creek, and actually up to Castro Valley. And at the other end, it crosses Carlos B and goes all the way down to Industrial Boulevard. That's the Foothill Trail. I should have mentioned that. We've managed to replace this bypass freeway with a hiking trail.
That's nice. That's great. Now, I do have another question from Tyler Dragoni. He says, do you believe that it was truly a city that decided slowly to live better without a freeway, or the people deciding quickly that they did not want or need a freeway? He says he's halfway through the book and notices that the city seemed to fight tooth and nail against the residents.
When I said the city, I meant the people of the city, not the city organization. And it was complicated because there were people on the Hayward City Council who did not like this thing. At one point, they approved they had a general plan committee that looked at everything, and the committee, all these different neighborhoods, B Street with Gail Steele and other people, and south and west, all over town. The neighborhood task force along the route, none of them like the freeway. It goes to the general committee. They don't like the freeway. Bertie Cooper's in charge of that. She runs and gets on the city council. She becomes mayor. She doesn't like it. So they amend the general plan to say, we don't want a freeway. Earlier on, the Chamber of Commerce pushed through a voter measure that required the city to make the bypass the highest priority of the city. So for a while, the city plan had directly contradictory policies in the general plan. It was pretty amazing. That stuff just shouldn't happen like that. So when I say the city, it's sort of everybody, slowly, people changing. as time goes along. The money never shows up. It gets delayed forever. More and more people decide they don't like it. There's one of the things I didn't have time for was the renewal of Measure B. Measure B was so great, let's do it again. Another Measure B. Okay, Measure BB. So they had these meetings of these committees, and we got our friends. Kevin Dowling was involved with this, and they had these little meetings. What do we want to do? And we kept the bypass off of this discussion. So they came forward with no bypass money. There's another problem for the bypass people. They couldn't get the money they wanted. It was controversial for the first Measure B. It never would have been successful in BB. And so again, we knocked down their ability to get the money. Getting the money was always a major problem, but it took the extra politics. It took 30, 40 years of politics, because right when we got to the end, the MTC changed its rules, and they decided, well, we will put some money into the bypass. And just at the same time that the money was disappearing from Measure B, MTC decided they were going to fund it. The problem was they didn't have money to go down from Harder Road down to Mission Boulevard. That money for that was just not there. And so they decided that they would use future money to get there. But actually, under the rules for programming, you're not allowed to program money that is not actually there to be programmed. The money is given to you for a certain length of time, a certain amount of money, and you're supposed to figure out what to do with that money, not money you think you might get way down the road, hypothetically in the future. You can't say, we're going to build this project, because under federal law, projects had to have a logical terminus, a logical ending. And Harder Road was not seen as a logical ending. Into Harder Road, boom, no, you got to get down further south. But MTC decided, well, we're going to use hypothetical, maybe we'll get it, maybe we won't, kind of money. And the Federal Highway Administration seemed to go along with that. They had to certify the final environmental impact statement. And it's sitting there and nothing happened. I asked the Federal Highway Administration, what did you do with this? They couldn't find any paperwork. It disappeared. They didn't decide to approve it. It just sat there. As far as I know, it's still in some file, where they just stopped. Now, theoretically, you should approve or disapprove. That never happened. It just fizzled.
My goodness. Well, we have one more question actually that just popped up from Mr. Frank Goulart. Frank, nice to see you. It says that when will
I forgot to mention Frank. So many people I should mention. Frank and Julie have been marvelous, and what they've done for the city of Hayward, for our community, it's just truly awesome. Okay, Frank, what's your question?
He wants to know when will the Foothill Trail be built?
The what?
The Foothill Trail?
It's being built in segments, and each property as it comes in has to dedicate stuff for the trail. It's going to be difficult because there are places like the PG&E right-of-way where unless you make something happen, it's not going to happen.
Is Hard building it, or who's building it?
The Foothill Trail is a zoning requirement, an overlay zoning, SD7 of the city of Hayward, which is part of the whole rezoning thing, leaving it to be implemented through property acquisition, but also Hard, as the city's Recreation and Parks Agency, has a major responsibility, and we're factoring them into our proposals for the quarry. Right now, also on Tuesday last, the city may have made a decision on the next area south, the Bunker Hill area, and they're required to build a trail through there down to Harder Road. So we're hopeful. The main thing is, don't build anything big and expensive where we want that trail.
Right. Well, it looks like that takes care of any of the questions that have been able to be posed so far. So I guess I will take this opportunity to thank everybody for joining us today. And if there's any other questions you may have for Professor Lewis, just to let us know. Also, if you are interested in purchasing his book, if you haven't already, we do have a link in the chat field that will take you to where you can purchase Professor Lewis's book. And also this program has been recorded. So if you came in late, or if you'd like to just remind yourselves of some of the things that Professor Lewis shared with us today, you can check our YouTube channel and we will make sure that a link is available to those. Other than that, we hope that everybody enjoys their Saturday. Thank you, Professor Lewis, for coming and speaking to us today about your book and about the much questioned 238 project. We hope everybody has just a very wonderful Saturday.
Do I get a chance to thank the Historical Society for putting a stand on?
Of course, of course.
And I want to advise you about my book. It's very expensive and very long, and you're going to get pretty bored with parts of it.
Oh, no.
So if you do get that book, be sure to read through the boring fast really fast. So figure out where you have all those names and dates and tedious little stuff of the events. Just boom, because you got to read for the stories. Incredible, great stories in that book.
That's what
If you can't afford the hard copy, get the book on the PDF from the Google Play Store. And it'll have wonderful pictures in it, great pictures of all this stuff that went on for so long and required the dedication, the persistence of so many people for so long, and has basically had a pretty good outcome.
The photographer, who was that? Who was the
I
photographer?
don't know, it's different photographers.
Different photographers for that one. Well, anyway, well, again, thank you so much, Dr. Lewis, and we just appreciate your time and hope everybody else enjoys their rest of their Saturday. So thank you and have a lovely weekend.